I'm 73 years old. I didn't think I'd be sitting here saying that, but here I am. The thing I learned too late is painfully simple and uncomfortable to admit. Regret didn't come from disaster. It came from delay. I'm not sick enough to be pitied, and I'm not well enough to forget what's coming. My hands shake sometimes when I button my shirt. I walk slower than I mean to. My future has become a small, manageable thing, a calendar you don't flip far ahead anymore. I'm not telling this for forgiveness or understanding. I don't need either. I'm just talking because there's no advantage left in pretending I didn't see it. Most mornings now are quiet, not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that shows you what's missing because nothing is covering it up anymore. I sit at the table longer than I need to, staring at the same spot on the wall, thinking about things I didn't think were important enough to stop for, conversations I rushed through, moments I assumed would repeat themselves. Time feels different when you don't have much of it left. It stops feeling like something you spend and starts feeling like something that's already been spent for you. When I was younger, I thought regret would be loud. I thought it would come from some big mistake, some obvious wrong turn. I imagined it would announce itself clearly, like a warning sign I deliberately ignored. It didn't happen that way. Regret arrived quietly. It didn't storm in. It accumulated like dust on a shelf you never look at, until one day the layer is so thick you can't ignore it anymore. I grew up ordinary. No tragedy worth mentioning. No dramatic hardship to explain away my choices. I had parents who did their best, and a life that moved forward the way lives are supposed to move forward. School, work, responsibilities, all very reasonable. In my 20s, I was busy becoming someone, or at least I thought I was. I woke up early, commuted with everyone else, complained about traffic, drank too much coffee. I told myself this was what building a life looked like. There were conversations I meant to finish later, calls I didn't return because I was tired, evenings I cut short because the next day mattered more, or so I believed. Nothing felt urgent. That was the problem. I remember standing in the kitchen one night while someone I loved was talking to me about something that clearly mattered to them. I nodded. I listened just enough to respond. But part of me was already gone, thinking about work the next morning, the presentation I needed to finish, the email I forgot to send. I didn't know that moment would matter. It didn't feel heavy. It felt like a Tuesday. That's how most of it went. Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays. That blurred together because I was always half present, always mentally somewhere else. In my 30s, life filled up. Promotions, bills, routines that looked like progress from the outside. I was tired in a respectable way, productive, needed. People praised me for it. You work so hard, they'd say. You're so responsible. That made it easier to keep going. External validation became a substitute for internal questioning. I told myself I'd be more present once things settled down. I told myself I was providing, building, securing something for later, for retirement, for that future version of myself who would have time to enjoy everything I was working toward. Later became a habit, a default setting. I miss things quietly, not events you mark on a calendar, but moments. The tone of someone's voice when they needed more than I gave. The way a room felt when laughter faded and no one noticed except me. Much later, when I was replaying it in my mind at 2 a.m., I didn't fail anyone outright. I showed up. I was there physically, but I just wasn't fully present. And no one accuses you for that. Not at the time. There's no script for you were there, but not really there. By my 40s, the pace had slowed a little, but the distance had grown. Relationships don't break all at once. They thin out. You assume the closeness is still there because nothing has exploded. No one has walked away. You're still talking, still making plans. But the depth erodes. Connection requires presence, and presence requires intention. And intention requires admitting that right now matters more than the future you keep prioritizing. I thought stability meant success. I thought comfort meant I was doing something right. There were weekends where I had nothing urgent to do, and I filled them anyway. Tasks, errands, small projects that made me feel useful. Being still felt uncomfortable, so I avoided it. I can remember sitting across from someone I loved, both of us quiet and thinking how normal it felt. Only now do I understand it wasn't normal. It was empty. We had become people who shared space but not inner lives. The cost didn't arrive with drama. It arrived like dust, slowly without sound, accumulating in places I didn't look until much later. I postponed things I thought would wait. Honest conversations about things that made me uncomfortable. Time together without distraction or agenda. Saying things plainly instead of assuming they were understood. Vulnerability instead of efficiency. I thought awareness would come with age. That clarity would just show up one day and fix things. That I'd wake up at 50 or 60 and suddenly know how to be present, how to prioritize correctly. It doesn't work that way. Age doesn't grant wisdom automatically. It just gives you more data to look back on. And sometimes that data is painful. The turning point wasn't cinematic. It rarely is. Someone got sick. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just enough to shift the ground under everything. I remember sitting in a hospital room, watching a machine breathe for someone I had loved my whole adult life. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't hysterical. I was calm in a way that scared me. That unnatural calm told me something. I had been emotionally unavailable for so long that even this moment couldn't fully break through. Clarity came then, quietly, too late to use. I realized I had mistaken consistency for presence. I had been there, but not available. I had shared space, but not attention. I had said, "I love you," but not shown it in the ways that mattered. There was nothing to fix in that room. No apology could rewind anything. No explanation mattered. The person I loved couldn't hear me anymore, and even if they could, what would I say? I'm sorry I was always thinking about tomorrow. What was gone didn't leave angrily. It simply stopped being possible. After that, time felt heavier. Days didn't rush anymore. They stacked one on top of another, each one more visible than the last. I noticed how few people called without a reason, how silence could stretch without anyone feeling obligated to break it, how being remembered slowly becomes optional when you haven't invested in showing up fully for others. There are things you cannot recover once they pass, not because you didn't care, but because you assumed you could care later. You assumed the offer would remain on the table indefinitely. Later is not guaranteed. It never was. I don't sit around drowning in regret. That would be dishonest. There were good years. There was laughter. There was love, even if I didn't always show it well. I'm not a villain in my own story. But there is a particular sorrow that comes from realizing you were present enough to function, but absent enough to lose something quietly, irretrievably. It's a strange loneliness. not dramatic, just steady, a background hum that never quite goes away. I look back now and see how reasonable all my decisions were. None of them were reckless. None of them were cruel. I wasn't gambling away savings or having affairs or abandoning responsibilities. That's what makes this harder to accept. I didn't ruin my life. I delayed living it. I optimized for a future that kept moving further away. That's the truth I needed 52 years to understand. Now, when I speak to younger people, I don't feel qualified to advise them. I'm not wiser in the way movies suggest. I'm not some sage figure with all the answers. I just see the math more clearly. Time doesn't ask what you meant to do. It only records what you did. And when I calculate what I actually did versus what I thought I was building toward, the numbers don't add up the way I'd hoped. If you're listening to this and you're still in the years where days blur together, I won't tell you what to change. I don't know your life. I don't know what you're dealing with. I'm not going to give you some generic advice about living in the moment or following your passion. But I'll ask you one question, the kind I wish someone had asked me, softly, without urgency, when I was 30. Who are you postponing, assuming they'll still be there when you're ready? Who are you planning to call back later? What conversation are you avoiding because it's uncomfortable? What moment are you letting slip by because you're thinking about the next one? You don't have to answer it out loud. You don't have to do anything with it right now. Just let it sit with you for a moment. Because here's what I know now. The people you love won't always wait. Not because they stop caring, but because life moves, whether you're ready or not. Opportunities to connect close. Windows shut. People change, or leave, or die. And you can tell yourself you were busy, you were building something, you were tired, you were stressed. All of that can be true. But at 73, those explanations don't comfort me. They just explain how I got here. As for me, I live carefully now, slowly. I notice small things because there isn't much else to notice. Morning light, old photographs that don't hurt the way they used to, the weight of a coffee cup in my hand. I don't expect redemption. I don't need to be remembered well. I'm not sharing this to be praised for my honesty or to fish for reassurance. I'm sharing it because maybe, just maybe, someone reading this is where I was, in the middle of it, busy, tired, assuming there's time. And maybe this will land differently for you than all the other reminders you've ignored. Maybe you'll read this and actually pause instead of bookmarking it for later. I'm 73 years old. My time is shorter than my memory. If this meant something to you, I'm glad. If it didn't, that's all right too. Maybe you're smarter than I was. Maybe you've already figured out what took me a lifetime to see. I've said what I needed to say. And when I finish speaking, the room will go quiet again, the same way it always does. But maybe, somewhere, someone will hear this and won't wait until they're sitting where I'm sitting, looking back at all the Tuesdays they let slip away.